Well, let's take our Bibles and let's open up to Romans chapter 11, which is one of our standard passages. And I just want to say for the setting here and also for the video that we're at this moment where we have some of our key leaders, pastors, board members from Tikkun International and the Ohale Network in Northern Israel and the Gateways Beyond training schools and Revive Israel and all. We have kind of a whole bunch of different groups of our network here on purpose to meet this week. And so what I'm teaching on in the mornings is to say, why are we together? So these aren't just scattered teaching. They're with a purpose to lay a foundation of, is there a purpose for these groups, Tikkun and Revive and Gateways and Ohale and the other groups that are networking with us? Is there a purpose for us to come into, as Dan Juster likes to say, cooperative unity? Is there a purpose for that? And yesterday, we talked about Acts 15. And that Acts 15 represents a certain pinnacle of the book of Acts. And you sort of go from Acts 1, where you've got Yeshua and his 12 disciples, and then he names them apostles, and he sends them out, and then by Acts 15, they come back, and they all have their own apostolic networks, and they come back to meet together. It's almost as if Acts chapter 1 had to lead to Acts 15 at some point. If not, then Yeshua's plan would have failed. So it's interesting to see, it starts with Yeshua and the 12, and then they go out and spread out and begin to start their own congregations preaching the Gospels. It goes around the world. And then they want to preserve the unity, and they come back, and they end up being this multiple apostolic friendship council of whatever. But it's logical. It had to go that way. And there's a beautiful consistency going from Acts chapter 1 all the way to Acts 15. And that's what we talked about yesterday, was should we try to do something on the pattern of what we see? As we started here at Revive on Acts chapter 1, are we going to combine something in sort of a joint cooperative effort as we see in Acts 15? Now today, we want to look at another very central passage for us, which is Romans 11. Now, we have been teaching Romans 11 for so long. I want to tell you that when I came back to the United States after I got saved in South America, Central America in 1978, and I began to work for a Messianic evangelist, one of the first ones, named Manny Brotman, in 1978. And by 1979, he began to send me out to teach, which was crazy. I was only a believer for about 12 months, but we went out and we had 4 messages. We had, Dan, you might remember this, we had the Sharing Yeshua seminar, which was how to tell people about the gospel in using Jewish terminology. We had the Messiah and the Passover, which was to go through the Passover Seder and show the Jewish elements of it. We had the Arab-Israeli conflict, which was to show the end times prophecies and what was the meaning of this. And then we had what we called the Romans 11 message. So I went out knowing nothing in 1978 and 79 and began to start teaching about this. So this is a foundational message for all of us. And every time we come back to that, you know, it's almost like when I get to this on my regular Bible reading, it's like, oh, Romans 11, come on. And it's totally different every time I read it. I can't imagine. It's just so foundational. So I wonder and the point of what I'm saying here, all this introduction is that God has called us together. The Gateways people are pastors from America and from Czechia and from Gateways and from Ohale and Revive and did I forget anybody? But in all our network, he's calling us together. And one of the reasons is there's something about God's purposes in Romans chapter 11 that is so big that we can't do it. No one can do it alone. No one can do it alone. I don't care how anointed Matthew is or how Guy is or for anyone here, no one can do this alone. It's too big of a deal. And so that's mainly the point that I want to get to today. But let's go through it. And as I say, I'm surprised every time we get together. About 4 years ago, when we were at the last large Israel Mandate Conference at IHOP, and Mike Bickle taught on Romans 11. And it was interesting, where he started was at the end of the passage, in verses 33 and 34, when it says, how great and how awesome is the wisdom and knowledge of God. And what he said was, do you realize that statement is referring to what Paul taught in Romans 11? In which he started with the idea of, guys, this chapter is deeper and more amazing than you can possibly think of. That's another good introduction to do this. And I want to say that as well, that as we come into Romans 11, there is a deeper mystery to this chapter. Even though we've taught this, I can't imagine how many times, there is something much more deeper this that we still haven't gotten to yet. We still haven't gotten to this. I mean, as if we think, we have Romans 11 written on our, tattooed on our chest or something. There's something here that we haven't even scratched the surface of yet what's in this. I want to tell you that in the chapter 11 of Romans, my friend Eddie and I teach on this sometimes. There's the word pleroma in Greek. I don't know much about Greek, but the word pleroma means fullness. And it's found twice in the book, in chapter 11 of Romans. And one is in verse 12, where it says, when the Jewish people are restored, what will their fullness be? And it's also found in verse 25, when it says that the international church, when they come into their fullness. Now think about that for a minute. Romans 11 is talking about two groups of people coming into the fullness of God's plan for them. No one has seen this yet. No one even knows what it is yet, but we're a lot closer today than we ever were before. And so what we're talking about in Romans 11, you have this joining together of God's fullness of his plan for the international church, the ecclesia, and the fullness of his plan for Israel. I would even adjust that a little bit and say you're talking about the fullness of God's plan for Israel and the nations. And what he's saying is, now you got to concentrate here, the fullness of God's plan for the nation of Israel comes into being, comes into fruition through this tiny minority of the Messianic Jewish remnant of Israel. That's where you get to the fullness of Israel. When you look at all of the history of Israel, the kings, the prophets, the priests, the war, the exile, the regathering, all that comes into place. The fullness of God's purpose for Israel, the pleroma, in verse 12, is in the DNA of it is in the Messianic Jewish remnant. And then at the right moment, coming soon, we hope, is going to spread across the rest of the nation. And then when he says, when you look at the nations of the world, where's God's fullness of plan for that? It's not in the nations. It's in the called out ones in every nation. It's in the believers in every nation. It's in the community of faith, the ecclesia of the nations. The fullness of the nations of the world comes into fruition in the ecclesia, in the church. And the fullness of Israel comes into fruition through the remnant. And then amazingly enough, as if those two things were already off the chart amazing, but then he says, and then you got to put those two together. What happens when you get the fullness of Israel into its fruition in the remnant, with the fullness of the nations in the church, and they come to their fullness, and then they get joined together? Off the chart. And that's what, now Paul saw this, but really, to tell you the truth, I think we can see things about this now that Paul couldn't even imagine yet. Because this is coming to pass right now. There's things going on right now that Paul could have only guessed of. We have 2,000 years of experience and history that we have more knowledge as we've learned about what he wrote. Now we come into this place, and it's really amazing. So there is a secret here in Romans 11 of the fullness of God's plan for the nation of Israel and the nations of the world. And then focusing that in to the remnant of the nation of Israel and the believers, the international church throughout the nations. That's where the fullness comes in. And then in Romans 11, they get joined together or grafted in together, or we might even say married. And I'll come to that in a few minutes. Now, so we have to go back and ask the question. Here's a deep thing. God has a plan for Israel and the nations. Before you get to the New Testament, before you get to faith in Yeshua and what it means to be born again in the remnant in the church, you go back before that. Even back before the time of Abraham, God has a plan for all the nations of the world. Let's go back to a little universal viewpoint here. God is Father. He made everybody. He loves all human beings. Before anything happened, even the days of Noah, he looks at all the human race and he loves us. He's our Father. And he wants this people in the human race to be his family. Most of them, at least at the time of Noah, are rebelling against him. But he's patient. He's bringing his family back to him. He's bringing his family. And so he has a plan. He loves everybody all the same. So that means he loves all the people of all the nations just the same. And he has this plan, but now he's looking for someone. Here the Holy Spirit's just speaking here. God is looking for someone to help bring all these people into the world into what he wants and to be a family for him. So he starts looking for people in this world who can help bring the nations, all the people in the world, into what God wants for them. And he finally finds some guy named Avram, who he looks at his heart and he said, this guy's got a heart of a dad. You know, he says, you're the guy I want. I'm a father. You got a heart of a father. Let's start with you. And he pulls Abraham out and he says, look, I'm paraphrasing it, of course. You've got a heart like a father like I do. And therefore, I want to start using you to call my family in from all of the nations of the world. I'm going to choose you for the purpose of gathering my spiritual family together from all the nations of the world. That's why I'm choosing you. And I'm choosing your children after you. And I'm choosing you for this task. Are you with me so far? Or was that confusing? What that means is that at the essence of God's calling for Abraham, and then after that, the Jewish people, the people of Israel, the very purpose for him creating them was to go find God's family, spiritual family among the nations and gather them together. Let me try to say that again. This is a deep thing. I mean, I'm kind of listening as this is going out. I'm not really even getting it yet, but he's saying God is looking at Abraham. He says, you have a heart of a father like I do. I'm going to call you, therefore, and your children and your family and then the people of Israel for a purpose. And your purpose is to go out with my Father's heart and find my children in every nation of the world, including Czechia, including China, including Africa, and go find them, and I want you to pull my family together. And that means that the people of Israel are chosen. They are chosen for a purpose. At their purpose that they are chosen for is to go out and bless the nations of the world, to gather God's spiritual children together from all around the world and bring them into the family of Israel. There is no other being. Now the Jewish people, we have totally interpreted that exactly opposite. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. It's just the opposite. Blessed art thou, O Lord of God, that's chosen us from all the peoples because we're better than the peoples and we don't care about the peoples. And that's how we've interpreted. In other words, exactly like 180 degrees opposite of what God's calling was from Abraham. You go back and you look at this in Genesis 12, he says, I've called you to go out and be a blessing for the nations. Abraham, his family, all the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, at the very core of our definition of who we are is to go out, bless the nations, gather the spiritual people of the family, and bring them together into the family of Abraham. Of course, through Yeshua. Now, what that means is when we seek to define the people of Israel. The nation of Israel is defined by her relationship to the nations. We are a servant people to the nations. But Paul explains it a little bit, but actually we're a servant people to the believers among the nations. And that is who we are. And this is why I want to use the marriage example. The word, there is no such thing as a husband without a wife. You can't have a husband. Nobody has a husband. You have a husband, you are a husband to a wife. Or like the word father. You can't be a father without children. You are father to someone. Well, Israel is the name, the calling of Israel is to be God's servant nation to the other nations of the world. If you take the other nations out of the world, out of the picture, Israel has no meaning. It's like it's like either a man or a woman looking at a mirror and saying, "Aren't I pretty? Aren't I pretty?" You know, it's like, well, where's your relationship? What are you just looking in the mirror? Aren't we chosen? Aren't we chosen? What? Chosen for what? You know, we're chosen to be a servant to the nations. Now, just the reverse though, when Israel goes out to the nations and the gospel is shared, goes out to the nation, people come to faith. Why do they come to faith? To come into the family. The people they come out of the nation, ecclesia, they're called out of the nations and they're called into the family of God, which started with Abraham. How can you be a believer in Yeshua, the greater son of Abraham, if you're not coming into the family of Abraham? So the very meaning of the church, the ecclesia, is those who have been called out of the nations and called into the spiritual family of Abraham. If you don't make that second half, then what did you get saved for? So there is something there is this covenantal relationship between the messianic remnant of Israel and the believing remnant of every nation, the ecclesia, that they are meant to be together. Now here's something I was looking at this also in this passage. In Romans 11, you'll notice that it also says salvation twice. It says salvation, if you look in a verse, again in verse 11, it says, when the people of Israel fell into sin, rejected the Messiah, that ended up in salvation going to the Gentiles. But then it says in verse 26 that when the church then comes to her fullness, the ecclesia comes to her fullness, that will lead to all Israel being saved. So what? These two verses about salvation. Israel rejects the Messiah, is exiled, and then the gospel goes out to the nations. Israel's fall brings salvation to the nations. And then the fullness of the international ecclesia brings salvation back to the Jewish people. Is that amazing? Now watch this. This is a shakeup. That's 2 verses. There's about 15 verses here talking about the relationship between Jew and Gentile, about our being grafted in, about our supporting one another, about our relationship, about our covenant, about our sharing our identity one with another. In other words, in this passage, there's one verse about salvation for all the nations. There's one verse about salvation of Israel, and about 15 to 17 verses about our relationship together. Uh-oh. In other words, we tend to look at this, all that stuff is not really important, it's just to get the people saved, and that's it. But you could also look at it the opposite. The people get saved to come into this family relationship. They get saved to come into this grafting in. In other words, the grafting in is an essential goal and product of the very preaching of salvation itself. This is what we're going for. We're going in this direction. Now, one of the reasons is that because of the strange history of Israel and the history of the church, which this is an overgeneralization, but for most of the 2,000 years from Abraham to Yeshua, most of the concentration of the kingdom was in the people of Israel. But from during Israel's exile for the last 2,000 years, it's been mostly in the nations. And the process has been just the opposite. Israel, we speak Hebrew, goes from right to left. And the New Testament was written in Greek, goes from left to right. Jewish people tend to think bottom up, and Christians tend to think top down. It's just opposite ways of thinking. You come in and you're trying to figure out how to make this work. Now, another reason for that. Now, here's interesting. Did you ever have the feeling, and I've heard this taught many times, that Paul explains salvation from chapter 1 to chapter 8, and then he has an interlude. I'm sure there's a better theological term for that. Dan, what's the term for that? Anyway, there's this break, parenthesis. It's kind of like you get to the end of the good stuff at the end of Romans 8, and then there's this kind of irrelevant section from 9 to 11 about the Jews who, don't they know that they've been done away with yet? Or so there, and then it's kind of like it's no connection. And I'm not seeing it that way at all right now. Just as I see a total consistency from Acts 1 to Acts 15. You start with the 12 disciples, and then you get to an international apostolic council. It has to happen. Now watch this. You start with Romans 1. What's the beginning of Romans 1? Yeshua, listen, is the son of David according to the flesh, and the Son of God in the Spirit as proved by the resurrection. In other words, from the very first moment of the book of Romans, you're talking about the tension between Yeshua's heavenly divine aspects and his earthly Jewish aspects. And basically the dual nature of Yeshua, his humanness and his divineness comes into play when it goes right to Romans 11, where you try to join the church and Israel together. In other words, this grafting together of Israel and the church has to do with this nature of Yeshua. He's one person. He's not schizophrenic, but we can't see it until we get this cooperation, this grafting in together. Now, because the nature, Yeshua's Davidic nature is very different from his divine nature. It isn't. It's the one and the same. I don't know how, sometimes people come to us and say, well, do you believe Jesus is God? I said, well, do you believe God is Jewish? I said, well, isn't he's the son of God and the son of David? What? It's a mystery. It's a mystery just to meditate on who Yeshua is. He's both a man and God at the same time. How is that? But it's one. And then you come and think about where you see this developing out into Israel and the church over 4,000 or 5,000 years, and all that is coming together in this Romans 11 mixture that Paul just said, wow, the awesome wisdom of God. Who can even imagine that this could happen? Now, they were stunned at this during the time when there was no answer to it. Now, we are coming to the stage where the answer is beginning to unfold in front of us. How much more exciting it should be for us. And how much more should we understand that none of us can do this alone. That we need, among the Messianic Jewish remnant, we need to cooperate. That's not our highest quality, but we need to learn how to do that. And we need to cooperate, graft back and forward with the believers in every nation of the world, which isn't also our highest quality. So we need to get over our flesh, learn to cooperate with one another, and learn to cooperate with the believers around the world so that this incredible vision of God would be manifest. What an amazing thing. And we have an opportunity to do this. People read this chapter for 2,000 years. They never had a chance to do it. Oh, are they jealous? Paul, are you jealous? So he's looking down at us and he says, I wrote that. Don't forget, I wrote that. You guys get to do it, but I wrote it, So he's looking at, we have an opportunity today. There's never been a remnant a messianic remnant in Israel at the same time that there's been a believing remnant in every nation in the world. This has never happened until right now. What an opportunity. And so that's why we have to ask one another, hey, is God calling us together to cooperate? Do we need to submit one another? Do we need to learn? Do we need to figure out, is there something bigger than the different parts of the pieces? The different pieces of the puzzle. Is there something, if we can come together, is there something bigger about this that can happen? Now it says here that the two have to be, they're grafted into one another. And God did this on purpose. He starts with the root, and then the branches are broken off, and then other branches are grafted in, and at the end, original branches are grafted back in together, and they take up the place of the original of the root, and it all comes. It's just amazing, And here it's also interesting that the male-female model of marriage is a little bit applicable here, because there's two totally different ways of thinking. And if you're married, you know that you and your wife, I'm speaking to the men now, you think totally different. I mean, there's no area of overlap in the thinking. It's totally different. You just have to listen. We men, I think God created women so that we could listen patiently, because we just don't get it, and we have to, it's part of it. That's part of the mystery. You say, God, I'll never understand my wife for 1,000,000 years. He said, yeah, that's part of the fun of it. You got another 1,000,000 years to just keep figuring this thing out, So now it's also complicated because our people are complicated. It says here in verse 29 that the Jewish people are enemies for the sake of the gospel, but beloved for the sake of the fathers. Well, the enemies are beloved. They're both. I mean, it's not so easy when you start dealing with this. It's confusing, and it's hard to understand what's going on. And so we have to think these things. We have to be listening, be patient, but in the end, when it comes together, there's something beautiful. I want to say something here as a parable. I'm not talking about something political, so don't get me wrong. I want to use it as a parable. Sometimes I look at the history of feminism over the last 100 years, and I wonder if it's done more good to women or more damage. Sometimes I think, well, now women, and I believe, don't get me wrong, I believe in equal pay for equal work. I believe that women have the freedom to do any work that they want to do, and equal rights in everything. I'm totally feminist in that viewpoint. But I said, does it help? It seemed to me that God God made man to work. Man is kind of like a donkey, and he made the woman to bring the beauty into life, beauty and love and home and warmth and children and fun, and we're the donkeys, and so now the women want to be like us. Come on. What good has that done? You're taking all the beauty out of life. You want to be like, we don't have anything beautiful to offer. I mean, look at us. Are we good? Are we beautiful? No. The women are beautiful. And they bring beauty into life with children and home and food and hospitality and love. And we're going to give that up to get money? Now, I'm not making a political statement. I'm trying to come in here. I'm trying to talk about this passage here. Because what I'm saying is there's something in this that brings the beauty of this life. And in Israel, if we're just Israel, I mean, guys, those of us that live here, how much fun is this? I mean, when we get to the fun by him, it's not. It's hell living here. And it's like, but there's beauty, and God wants to bring His beauty, His family, His prayer, His worship, the bridal paradigm of intimacy with them, and all is going to come to us from the church. What do we want? I mean, just another war? Let's show everybody how good we are to attack back when they attack us. And that's who we are. And now there's an important part to that as well. There's something the church has to learn from that part. You think you're going to get on this just by worshiping and being a bride? It's not going to work, folks. We're moving into a war. And if the church bride doesn't get this fact that we're moving into a war, and the war's got to do with Israel, you're going to lose everything. So, all I'm saying is that you don't want the men to be acting like women. You don't want the women to be acting like men. And in this case, what we're talking about is there's a beauty in Israel and the church. There's a different perspective in the Messianic remnant of Israel and in the international ecclesia. And when you bring them together, you have beauty. And if you don't, then you just miss everything. You miss the whole purpose, of what was supposed to go on. Now, one last thing I want to say I've just been quoting verses all along here because we were a little late on time today. But let's look at. Here's one thing I wanted to say about the wife. I was thinking about it. It said that the loss of Israel became salvation to the Gentiles, so that they could then make Israel jealous. I was just thinking, there's such kind of like a male-female crazy thing going on there. Anyway, but let's go on. I want to show you one more verse here. I want to ask you a question. What is the most, and we'll end with this, what is the most, boy, this is really politically incorrect, huh? You're going to have to edit this out. But anyway, concentrate. What is the most difficult word in the entire Romans chapter 11? What is the most difficult word? Very good. The most difficult word is in verse 24, the word theirs. Let's look at this together. It says, הרי אם אתה נחרטת מעץ זית בר מטבעו, וניגוד לטבע הורכבת על עץ זית טוב, כל שכן אלה המקוריים יורכבו על עץ הזית שלהם. And it says this, for behold, if you, now he's speaking to the believers in the nations, he says, if you were cut from an unnatural olive tree, a wild olive tree, and against nature, you were grafted in to a good olive tree, how much more will the original branches be grafted into their own tree? That's a tough word. Let's think about it for a minute. In discussion with people about what is the meaning of the word root in Romans 11. And we tend to say, well, the root is speaking about the messianic remnant. Oh, that's already offensive. That's the second most offensive word there. And so we say, well, people say, what do they say? It's not the messianic remnant, it is Yeshua. Now, is Yeshua the root? Of course he's the root. Yeah, Isaiah 11 says he's the root and the offspring. Do we believe that? Of course we believe that Yeshua is the root. And by the way, I want to remind you this. When you have a theological problem, the answer to 99% of all theological problems is one word, and the word is both. You always argue it's not this, it's not that. And by the way, I want to tell you something. You said something yesterday. You said from Isaiah 2, it's not this, it's that. I want to correct that slightly. What we're saying, it's not only that. It's not only a millennial vision. It also is present tense. Because there's no reason this is a little side comment, but when you get a revelation about something, we have a tendency to say, and everybody else's viewpoint is wrong. You don't have to say that. You say, wait a minute, it's what's this? It's not only that, but here's a perspective on it you may not have seen before. Now, so what I'm saying, do we believe that Yeshua is the root? Sure, we believe that Yeshua is the root. And you only get into this tree by believing in Yeshua. Yeshua is the one who brings Israel into her fullness by leading them to a relationship with the Gentiles. And Yeshua is the one who brings the nations of the world into their fullness by bringing them into relationship with Israel. It's only through Yeshua that Israel gets saved, the nations get saved, and they come into this covenantal unity together. So it's only through Yeshua. Only through Yeshua. That's one of the things we're saying to our nation. You can't come into your fullness without the Messiah of Israel. How are you going to? It's not going to work. But the root here also doesn't mean only Yeshua. It also means the Messianic remnant. Why do I say that? Here's just a quick little side teaching for 1 minute here. It also means the remnant. Why? Number one, because the meaning of the discussion of the passage in Romans 11. What is the discussion of the passage? The discussion of the passage in verse 1 is God's plan for the Jewish people done away with? That's what we're talking about in this passage. This is not talking about the divinity of Yeshua. It's talking about, has Israel lost her calling? That's the topic here. So when we say it's talking about the Messianic remnant of Israel, that's not an offense against Yeshua. It happens to be the topic of this chapter. Are you listening to what I'm saying? And then he says, and if the root is holy, the rest of the body is holy. Could that possibly be talking about Yeshua? Is that a discussion? Is Yeshua, if Yeshua would be holy, the body would be holy? No. He's talking when the holiness of Yeshua comes in to the remnant, it goes out to the nations. And then it says this, and it says, and who is supporting who? Is the branches supporting the root, or the root supporting the branches? It makes no sense if that's talking about Yeshua. Could Paul possibly be saying to believers, tell me, are you supporting Yeshua, or is Yeshua supporting you? That's not an issue here. That's obviously also talking about the historical relationship. So when you walk through the passage, you'll see that it's all these things prove that there is the central aspect of what's being talked about, the root here. Now it also says that now here we just said the root will support the branches. That's heavy for us. Have you ever thought about that? For us as Messianic believers, it's saying we're supposed to be supporting the international church. Can I say it that? Let me try to put it grossly. We Messianic Jews are supposed to be supporting and lifting up the international church. Have we done that? Not much. We've done a lot of fundraising on the international church. Hello. But we haven't done much lifting them up. I mean, it actually says we're supposed to actually be lifting up the international. That's another reason why we need to cooperate. Are you listening to me, folks at Ohale and Gateways and Tikkun and at Revive? We can't do that alone. This already feels heavy to me. But we're supposed to be lifting up the whole church. I'm almost done. Concentrate for 2 more minutes here. So this is a big thing. We're supposed to be bringing life and holiness and support and prayer to the nations of the world. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We haven't done it yet. And let's start doing what God's called us to do with it. And then it says this. It says that they are the original branches. Listen, true believers around the world are looking. You ever heard somebody say this? I'm looking for original Christianity. There's something original. People around the world, they don't want something that has been diluted for 2,000 years. They want to go back to, what do they call it? Primitive Christian, apostolic Christianity, original Christianity. But folks, here we have an opportunity. It says here that we're the original branches. We have an opportunity to restore to the whole body the type of things that we see going on in the Bible. Well, let's get doing it, and not avoid it. And the last thing is this. It says here, and this is the verse with this hard word, and I'll end with this. It says that when the Jewish branches get grafted back in at the end of time, then notice that the word original branches transitions into the word root. There's another place that you see that the root has to be referring to the Messianic remnant, because it says, when the original branches, the native branches get grafted back into their tree, they get grafted back into their own tree. So there you're sliding from the branches to the root. Now, what does that mean? It means that we are supposed to be looking at this olive tree as our olive tree. Not in a selfish way, in a loving way, in a family way, in an adopting way. See, we're supposed to have the spirit of Abraham, our father. And we're supposed to be looking at all the believers around the world, from China to Czechia to Africa, and saying, these are lost children. These are the children of our family. And we're supposed to go in them and say, hey, you're supposed to be in our family. Now, if we do that, you get a dividing line. Half the people get offended, and half the people will say, where have you been? We've been waiting for you, please. And there's adoption coming in here. If it's done with humility and with love and saying, you are our family. And we have to look at every believer around the world and saying, you are the family of Abraham, not just the family of God. Sure, they're the family of God, but you're the family of Abraham. You are our family. This is ours. And we need to take ownership in a sacrificial way. This word scares the life out of me. I have nothing prideful about this. Are you kidding? We need to adopt all of that? It's like, wow, that's too big. But no, we said, this is ours. And we need to look at that olive tree. 60 seconds now. We says, look, that olive tree is a picture of the people and the family of God. It's not talking about olive trees. It's not talking about roots. It's not talking about branches. It's talking about a group of people. That's the picture. It's a symbol of a group of people. It's striving to describe us here. And right for the first time in history, this chapter is coming to pass. It never had before. And it's grafting in, pulling us together. This diversity, this unity, this harmony, this love, this marital relationship, this family relationship is coming into being right now that it never has before, never has had the possibility to even look at it before. Because the prerequisite is a developed messianic remnant in the land of Israel and believers from every nation around the world who are looking to be grafted into Israel. That's the prerequisite. And this is, the incredible depth, the wisdom of God is right in front of us. And we have an opportunity to step into this. But it will mean that we have to humble ourselves at least twice. Well, maybe first before God, but secondly before one another, and say, we need to work together. This is too big for any of us. And then thirdly, first before God, then before one another, and then before our brothers and sisters around the world, and say, we were supposed to be adopting you as our family. And our message to you has been, we're chosen and you're not, we're better than you are. That's not going to work anymore, folks. And we're supposed to reach out and adopt and say, this family is our family. This family is our family. When we can look at every believer in the world and say, you are part of my family. This is my family, our family. This isn't somebody else's family. This is our family together. We'll step into something that goes all the way back to the time of Noah and goes all the way to the nature of Abraham, to the nature of Yeshua, to Paul's plan here. It all goes, and it's all coming together in our time. What a wonderful opportunity we have to step into that.